This is a national webcast address. It'll end about an hour later, and then we'll go to the local conversation.
Relations having on our lives. And the last 4 months have seriously tested its durability. Even while U.S. and Chinese leaders expressed interest in maintaining communications, high tariffs coupled with Chinese government retaliation have caused businesses to scramble to secure their supply chains. Prices are projected to rise and economies to slow. At the same time, the space for cooperation, already limited, is shrinking further. How did the U.S. China relationship get to this point, and where is it headed? Since its inception in 1966, the National Committee has been committed to holding frank conversations that bring a wide range of perspectives. And that is certainly true tonight. We are thrilled to have with us 3 distinguished China experts with differing points of view who will discuss the current state of U.S. China relations and answer your questions. First, Lingling Wei, chief China correspondent at the Wall Street Journal and a Pulitzer Prize finalist in 2021. Next, Matthew Turpin, visiting fellow at the Hoover Institution, who from 2018 to 19 served as the U.S. National Security Council's Director for China and a senior advisor to the Secretary of Commerce. Finally, Ryan Haas, Director of the China Center at the Brookings Institution, who served as the NSC's Director for China, Taiwan, and Mongolia from 2013 to 2017. To participate in the conversation online, use the hashtag CTH2025. You can also scan the QR code at the bottom of the screen to take the CTH survey and share your thoughts on current U.S.-China policy. Let me now begin with a few of my own questions for our distinguished panel. Matt, I turn to you because you served in the prior Trump administration. Tariffs are on top of everybody's mind. Can you give us the administration's argument for the tariffs? And before we do that, let's look at one of the polls on the impact of tariffs that the participants believe will have on the U.S. economy and their lives. Question is, do you think Trump's high tariffs on Chinese goods will hurt or help the U.S. economy in the short term? 93% say it will help. In the long term, we have that poll?
Yeah.
Hurt. In the mid-long term? All right, we don't have, there we are. There it drops to 77%, with 9% thinking it will help. Give us the argument.
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, thanks, Steve, so much for having me. And it's a real pleasure to be with Ryan and Lingling, 2 great friends. So first of all, I want to just say I am not a surrogate for the administration. So I'm going to give what I think is my assessment of what I think their worldview is, and sort of what they're trying to achieve, right? So I think that's important to understand. Often this gets sort of framed as just tariffs. And I think what we have to understand that I think the President of the United States has a worldview that he believes that a rules-based international order is now an incredible burden on the United States, that you have a global trading system that is undermining the long-term interests of the United States. And therefore, he seeks to change and re-engineer the global trading system to be something more advantageous for the United States. And he is also seeking to re-industrialize the United States. He feels that decisions made in the 1990s around what we colloquially consider to be globalization have really placed the United States at a disadvantage by hollowing out manufacturing. And it's very difficult for the United States to be the kind of power that it needs to be in the world without that, and to be completely dependent, for the most part, on the PRC, which is in many ways quite hostile to the United States. And so I think that's his worldview. His goal is to sort of achieve that re-engineering of a global trading system. And tariffs are a tool in the toolbox to achieve that. And I think he believes that the tariffs are a particularly good negotiating tool because the executive branch has broad authorities to impose those tariffs without Congress has delegated many of those authorities. But I think it's also clear that he is using a variety of other tools, whether those are outbound and inbound investment screening and restrictions, export controls, things in terms of tax changes inside the United States. All of those things are meant to achieve a set of goals around changing a trading system and reindustrialization, right? That's what they're trying to achieve.
Brian, the tariffs have gone up, they've gone down, they've been suspended, only to be reapplied shortly thereafter. What do those changes reveal about the Trump administration's priorities?
Well, Steve, let me just say at the outset that if the Trump administration had Matt as a spokesperson, I don't think that we would have 93% of the people being polled saying that it's going to hurt.
It's a very articulate answer.
But I have to just admit that the experience of the past nearly 100 days has felt a little bit like going into surgery but being kept awake for it. It's been painful to watch. And I say that as someone who had a view and wrote that President Trump entered his second term with a very strong hand to play with respect to China. When he came into office, the economy was strong, our alliances were sound, and the United States was a magnet for capital and talent from around the world. President Trump also did something that no other politician in the United States was willing to do, which was to show respect to Xi Jinping throughout the presidential campaign. If you listen to his message on China, it was basically that the United States under President Trump will be tough and firm, but will also work well with President Xi to get deals done and will avoid war. That resonated, I think, with the American people, but it also created a useful on-ramp for the U.S. China relationship. And yet, unfortunately, instead of delivering concrete results, what we've seen is chaos for the past 100 days. And I don't think the chaos is a function of a policy process gone awry. I think it's a reflection of the fact that President Trump is his own desk officer on China issues. He is driving a lot of the decisions, the fluctuations that we're talking about, and that's a very difficult problem to solve. And so I think the flux that we've seen that your question pointed us towards is probably going to be something that's going to be with us for a while.
Lingling, over the last few weeks, we've seen President Trump being vocal about his unhappiness with the Fed chair, Jerome Powell, though he said he's not looking to fire him recently, but he's complained about not lowering interest rates. In the context of what's going on in the tariff standoff with China, if interest rates were lowered, as Trump suggests, how might it impact the U.S. economy? By the way, that question comes from James O'Brien from Bryant University. Unfortunately, we can't get him on.
Sure. Steve, thank you very much for having me. It's such an honor to be with two legends in the U.S. China space. I love that question because that's what a business journalist is, is supposed to know about. Lower interest rates, obviously would reduce the cost of borrowing. That could, spur investment, business investment and consumer spending, and also can help foster markets, stock markets, bond markets, overall economic activity in the United States. So, in theory, lower interest rates could help put the United States in a stronger position in any potential negotiations with China. So that's why he's really all over the Fed about, the need to lower interest rates, especially given the tariffs have this inflationary effects on the economy.
Yep, another tool in the toolbox.
Exactly, a tool in the toolbox, right?
So it's not his tool.
It's not his tool.
It's Jerome Powell.
And I just wanted to say one thing, we have done a lot of comparison between the US and China, fundamentally different systems. What the US has is this credibility and also independence of the Fed, right? That has given the US dollars and US markets so much power, right? Yeah. That's made the US the investment destination for global investors. China's central bank, as we all know, has zero independence. So we do not want to have our Fed here lose any kind of independence because of political pressure. I'm telling you, it's not just investors in bond market, in stock market watching. China is watching this play out as well.
Matt, China has not responded in any constructive way. There just has been retaliation. There have been restrictions on exports, there, especially of rare earths, which is deeply damaging. How has that affected the Trump folks' consideration of this issue?
Yeah, I mean, I think, my assessment of China's response up to this point, and retaliatory tariffs on their side. So U.S. exports to China, and seeking to replace with other imports. So things are looking very good for Brazil in terms of agricultural exports to China. And so that has a very real potential negative impact over time, and potential political blowback as that hits certain communities and constituencies much harder. But I would question, though, the ideas around critical minerals and the restrictions on critical minerals. These things strike me as much more China's efforts to find something that they can match as reciprocal to U.S. export controls. But as someone who had spent quite a bit of time doing export control policy, it is really not a wise idea, objectively, to impose export controls on commodities. China's dominance in critical mineral processing is only because they make them artificially cheap, right? So when you deny those things to the world, it does allow for others to produce those things, right? Processing of germanium is not a technologically advanced activity. It's cutting-edge 1970s technology. Lots of countries around the world used to make and process germanium. They don't anymore because China makes it artificially cheap. If it denies those things to the world, others could make those things. Right. And so it's not a
how long would that take to kind of build up production? And
well,
because some of these things are only available
for China.
Issue. Yeah,
right. It's really not a new issue.
Yes,
so what we've seen is a lot of stockpiling. And we've seen preparations that folks have taken, whether it's Australia or Malaysia, or, various countries have begun to figure out what are ways they could fill gaps. And I think, what we're going to find is that there will be a muddle through. I think we should take, at sort of face value, the experience that China's embargo on critical minerals and rare earths on Japan in 2010 and 2011 around a dust up over the Senkakus. The reality was that China imposed those. It certainly imposed some costs on Japan. Japan began to build around those things and stand up alternatives and find ways to work around it. And China called those things off within 18 months because they found that they weren't working.
Yeah.
And so those are not, objectively, they're not good export controls. Don't export control things that are commodities. And that's sort of essentially, other than advanced batteries and some advanced manufacturing around some magnets, those are kind of the only areas that they've got, that they have a technological advancement on that others can't make.
No question, that's correct. If you restrict the export, then others are going to find the market.
Yep.
Can the same be said of semiconductors that we have?
Very difficult.
But hasn't China succeeded now in Huawei and others in kind of developing some pretty good?
I think what we're watching is a very, very real efforts on their part to do so. But I think we should have to remember that the United States has maintained dual-use export controls on semiconductors since the 1960s, since they were invented. We have a whole regime around this. And the United States, along with some of its key allies, have maintained a generational advantage on manufacturing advanced semiconductors for quite some time. I think what we're seeing now is reports around a Huawei chip that is some subset below an H20 NVIDIA GPU. An H20 NVIDIA GPU is quite a bit beneath the cutting edge of NVIDIA's GPUs that they are selling, that they are not allowed to sell in China, right? And so this is a dynamic. So it gets reported that they're making progress. They're making progress, absolutely. But they've maintained a generational advantage over Chinese semiconductor production. And it isn't as if they haven't been trying for a long time. You had a gigantic semiconductor investment fund stood up in 2014. They put in hundreds of billions of dollars into doing this, and they have not been successful yet.
Okay. Last question on this. Will there be a breakthrough? Will the U.S. and China start talking and get some kind of deal? Real quick answers, because we got to move on to the next subject.
Lingling.
For now, it's really hard to have a breakthrough. I mean, in order to break the logjam we're in right now, I think one thing China could do is to really offer something on fentanyl, to show some good faith effort to the Trump administration that, we're also ready to talk to you about one issue that is of so much importance to America.
Yeah.
I agree with that. That is an area that's ripe for a breakthrough.
Yeah.
I think it's very hard to imagine how sort of all of the issues get resolved. I think we're in a, if we got ourselves some sort of small victories, it'd be around a détente, not a resolution of the tensions.
Brian, anything to add?
I would just say that the tariff wall is extremely high right now. It will be for a while, but there is still a small exit door available. But to go through it, I think that President Trump will have to open it.
What was so interesting, a year and a half ago, well, in November, in March of last year, we met with Xi Jinping. 15 Americans met with Xi Jinping, and we asked about fentanyl. And he gave a very articulate answer where he said, we, as a civilization, understand. We had the opium wars. We understand. And of course, we'll do everything we can to prevent the sale of it. He had the wording right of precursors to fentanyl globally. But obviously that hasn't that's right. That's what I was going to say. It hasn't occurred. Brian, several of the audience members have raised the question of whether, especially Robert Burns from the South Dakota World Affairs Council and Tony Yang from Bonn University, does trade disputes heighten the possibility of military conflict, especially over Taiwan?
Well, it's a great question. And for a long time, the United States has warned China that if they were to take military action against Taiwan, that they would face crippling, punishing economic repercussions. And to the extent that we are emptying our cupboard of economic tools now during peacetime, it sort of limits the credibility of the threat of future economic actions against China if they were to take military action against Taiwan. All that said, my own view is that China is not going to make a decision on use of force in Taiwan based upon a calculation of economic cost. This would be a cosmic roll of the dice for the Chinese leadership. Anything short of absolute and quick victory would imperil potentially the hold of the Chinese Communist Party in China. And so it's going to be an extremely high threshold for China to decide to use force. And because of that, I don't think that we are on a knife's edge now. I don't think that conflict is imminent or inevitable. It's possible, and that should keep us sober and concentrate us on preparing for the possibility, but I don't think that it's going to.
Let's see what our audience thinks about that. The poll question, or I think war between America and China will break out over Taiwan before the end of Trump's second term. 49% say no, 17% say yes, and 35% don't know. So I would have thought it would be slightly higher. Matt, highly that it wouldn't occur, but Matt, a memo Defense Secretary Hegseth sent to Pentagon staff last month said China is the pacing challenge and that the department should reorient defense assets towards the protection of Taiwan. Has that strategic vision been implemented so far? And how is the administration changing military strategy and force distribution to respond to China?
Yeah. I mean, I think this is a case where we see significant continuity over multiple administrations, right? So when I worked in the Defense Department, when Ryan was my colleague at the NSC back during the Obama administration, Secretary Hagel released a Defense Innovation Initiative at the end of 2014, really about figuring out how do you figure out how the Department of Defense focuses on a new and rising challenge that's coming primarily from China, right? We've watched the same thing during Trump administration, an announcement of a national security strategy, a national defense strategy that announces China as the principal rival that we are focused on. Secretary Austin His national defense strategy, the headline of that national defense strategy is China is the pacing challenge, right? So Secretary Head says memorandum, the continuation of those things, right? We've been undergoing this for years. U.S. Pacific Command, now Indo-Pacific Command, is the largest combatant command the United States has had. It's been that way since the 1990s. That's where we field our most advanced military hardware. The United States has been planning for a challenge here for quite some time. And so I think what we're seeing is the continued incremental movements as the United States seeks to reduce its commitments in the Middle East. It seeks to increase burden sharing with our allies in Europe as it rebalances to the Indo-Pacific, right? That's a long-term policy goal of multiple administrations, and we're still continuing to see that go through. And I think we should be relatively confident that those are things that we are able to do.
Higher education, people-to-people exchanges has become a very important part of kind of discussions today. We're seeing the expulsion of, or the revocation of visas for Chinese students in the United States. We're seeing visas not being granted. So let's go to a question from April Mao from the U.S China Institute Town Hall. There we are.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm April Mao, and I am currently an undergrad freshman majoring in communications here at USC. So yeah, I guess my question is also a timely one. So with the recent changes in US immigration policies, how do you foresee these developments affecting Chinese international students and scholars, particularly in terms of visa issuance and academic opportunities? And what advice would you have for them to navigate the current uncertainties?
Lingling, can you take that one?
Well,
It's a tough one, sorry.
it's really a tough one. I came to the United States in 1999 as a student. So also very personal question, because I have been asked a lot by some friends, and I think because the much stricter immigration policies these days will definitely lead to delays and difficulties in visa grants for Chinese students, much tougher. And so there are certain fields of study, especially with respect to science and technology. Some of those fields might be off limits to Chinese students going forward. I understand the Chinese leadership is very concerned that they can no longer send Chinese students here to study STEM. So that's a huge concern. What a compare and contrast. Back in the 90s, when people like me were trying to apply for school here, if you were your student, specialized in science and technology, was so much easier than people like me, journalism, right? There's like, so it's a 180-degree turn. But in terms of advice, I really think you have to really know what you want, right? You want to explore the rest of the world. If that still go, in addition to the United States, there are also other alternatives as well. And also very important to stay informed based on, informed of what the US policies are. And one other thing, very, very, very important, is to really be accurate about your documentation. Because, there have been instances where Chinese students, in order to come here, they cut corners and maybe lied about certain things. Don't do that again.
I noticed, in fact, your institution, Hoover, came out with a report today or yesterday.
I did not see it.
Talking about,
I'm sorry.
they analyzed the DeepSeek, the education of the people, 100 people that DeepSeek.
Right, yes.
And they said they were basically not educated in the United States, that they were products of Chinese universities. What's that mean for kind of all of these policies restricting STEM folks from coming here?
Yeah. I mean, I think, we've known for quite some time that in terms of talent for artificial intelligence, both the United States and China have been neck and neck for quite some time. And so I think we should be not all that surprised that in that particular realm,
Right.
that sort of breakdown is not all that, is the way it is. So I think we've seen that before. I mean, we've seen this in the artificial intelligence area. It also suggests that obviously you have a very high quality education system inside China, and that's something the United States is going to have to consider and deal with in the future.
And just add one more quick note,
Yep.
and that very high quality higher education system in China actually has benefited from Chinese students studying in countries like the United States. All those sea turtles, so-called
Yeah.
sea turtles, then
The sea turtles are those who go back.
Exactly,
Yeah.
they went back, they now teach at those universities, they train engineers that now staff DeepSeek and other companies. So this engagement in the past few decades really helped China tremendously.
Ryan, Gary Yu of Columbia University asked what April kind of was asking implicitly. Are we seeing a revival of the China Initiative, the Department of Justice initiative launched during Trump 1 that sought to prosecute potential Chinese spies working in American research and industry and in universities?
Well, I will try to tackle this question, but if I can just add one sentence to the discussion that we just had. I think that having foreign students come to the United States is absolutely essential to the vitality and strength of the United States. If we're just talking in a US versus China context, China has a population 4 times the size of the United States, which means that the United States needs to have productive capacity 4 times the of China's to be able to be competitive and to retain an edge. The only way that we can do that, Steve, is by bringing the best and the brightest, attracting them as magnets to come to the United States. And we make it hard for bright, talented, ambitious foreign students to come to the United States at their own peril. Which leads me to the question about the China Initiative. So the China Initiative was, a program started in the first Trump administration to try to root out industrial espionage and to try to put a real spotlight upon researchers in academia and industry who were taking direction or funding from China without being transparent about it. And the program came under attack because critics of it felt like it was creating brain drain, causing very talented Chinese people to be sea turtles to go back to China, but also because of the effect that it had on anti-Asian racism in the United States, which was inimical to our core values as a country and a people. And so when President Biden and his administration entered office, they rescinded the China Initiative, largely on the basis of concern about it being a racial profiling tool against Chinese Americans and ethnic Chinese citizens. And so that's where we are now. The members of the House of Representatives have voiced interest in seeing a revival of the China Initiative or something like it. It is also a topic of discussion in conservative policy circles. I don't know where we will go from here, but my one confident prediction is that the more that President Trump becomes disillusioned about the prospect for progress with China, the higher the likelihood there will be of the return of an initiative like this or something resembling.
But of course, the prosecutions of industrial espionage and research espionage didn't end with the Biden administration's decision to end that.
Right.
They also began a whole process to focus on transnational repression, which is what we were also seeing across this, is that you've got the Chinese state that uses Chinese students and Chinese individuals inside the United States to violate conflicts of commitment, conflicts of interest, and do things and incentivize them to be able to come back and provide the kinds of technologies and things that they would be otherwise denied through export controls and other areas. In many ways, the Chinese government is the one who chooses to weaponize their own citizens to do those sorts of things. And that's the kind of, those things have not gone down. We watched, Director Christopher Wray lay out a significant amount of evidence of what we were seeing. Those were things we were seeing during the Biden or the Obama administration as well. And I think we've got to be able to sort of call out the kinds of activities the Chinese government does, placing their own citizens into these kinds of dangerous situations where they're violating U.S. laws.
Rarely students.
Well, certainly graduate students.
I get
There's not from the FBI. There's not much evidence of that, but certainly there is industrial espionage. But when the FBI investigated how many graduate students were spying, they found a few who filled out forms right, but there weren't a lot of spies. But let's,
I mean, quite a few PLA officers that had lied about themselves on their visa forms.
Yeah.
Who were then ejected out of the country.
Yeah.
Right, so I
As they should be. Yeah.
completely disagree with you that there was no problem with students.
spying.
Well, those are PLA officers that had lied about what their positions were.
Let's go to Muscatine Community College, Alexia Oliva.
Hello, as said, I am Alexiana Oliva. I'm a student here at Muscatine Community College, and my question is, for decades, the flow of tourists, artists, students, and business people between the U.S. and China served as a steady force, even when political tensions are high. But recently, as relations have deteriorated, the flows of people traveling between our two countries have been significantly reduced. How do you think Iowa can maintain a sustainable and effective exchange with China?
Lingling?
Again, a tough question, given the political environment today. I guess, people to people exchanges, I hate that term because that sounds so jargony, but sorry for lack of creativity here. It's so important to at least maintain some linkage, between these two world powers. We just talked so much about how the engagement really helped pull China out of poverty and develop into such a big country. I think, a lot of issues are, both sides, right? Take both sides to tango. China's national security law, this campaign to harmful spies in China really has had a chilling effect on people traveling there, wanting to work there and study there. And same here, we talked about the China initiative and the consequences as well. For Iowa, you have a very strong agricultural sector. And originally, I'm from a farm province in China. It's called Jiangxi province. So I guess there are some kind of channels you can take advantage of, maybe with Chinese officials, overseeing agriculture sector in some big farm oriented provinces. We still can keep that kind of dialogue, conversation, and channels going.
In Washington, where Matt and I live, it's often the U.S. China relationship is often reduced to the relationship between the two federal governments. And what Lingling is pointing to is important, but there are two sets of relationships between the United States and China. One of them occurs completely independently of the decisions that are being made in Washington. And it's important that as it serves our interests, that we continue to maintain those connections across the Pacific.
Certainly getting more flights and solving the war in Ukraine will have the ancillary benefit of allowing flights from the United States to China to go over Russia, which will knock 3 to 4 hours off the flying time. Let's talk about technology and national security. Since returning to office, the Trump administration has increased restrictions on China's access to advanced technologies, in particular semiconductors. We polled the audience on their support for this policy. Can we see? I'd be curious where the audience comes out. Is it a good idea? So let's see, 42%, yes, but only for the most sensitive. 19% yes, a set of across the board necessary. 24% no, these policies disrupt global innovation. Industry can regulate itself, and 15% not sure. So a pretty split audience. Matt, what do you think? You worked on this in Trump 1, so you know it pretty well.
And I'm a retired military officer. I still have a lot of friends who are serving, and to be perfectly honest, I have absolutely no problem with denying technology that would make the PLA a better fighting force. I have no problem with that at all.
Right.
And so I agree that I think where we saw the majority of the sort of the place come down is yes, and let's limit those things to the most sensitive sectors. And I think we actually have seen the U.S. government make those kinds of efforts to limit those things to those most necessary sectors. I think that what we should be seeing is much better enforcement of those things. But fundamentally, I think it is, there's a reason why we developed export controls we developed in 1950, really to impose them first on the PRC during the Korean War. We've kept them in place since then because we're not interested in a potential adversary from gaining advanced military capabilities that could one day kill Americans. And so we're just not interested in having that happen.
But how do you draw that line? In other words, should we not sell boots since it makes them?
Well, we obviously do sell boots.
But comfortable boots make the military more efficient.
So
obviously I'm joking, but where do you draw the line?
Well, I mean, so the Export Administration Regulations have 10 chapters, microelectronics, nuclear equipment, right? We can go through the 10 chapters. Each one of those things is very specific of what it lays out, and you can go through and look at those. I mean, it's actually not all that opaque. It's actually fairly clear. There is an effort to portray it that this is unreasonable and that this is unthought out and is not thought through. My contention is that often results from a willingness to cloud the issue, to be able to call those things that I think are actually quite justified into question, right? We watch this across the semiconductor industry that would love to sell more and more advanced semiconductors to clients there and seek to downplay the risks there. And I think we've got a healthy debate across the U.S. government to be able to draw lines, and we have been drawing lines on this.
Ryan, what do you think of that?
I broadly agree with Matt, so I won't repeat what Matt said. I will just add a few things to it, which is that I see the diffusion of technology much like the spread of water. You can direct it, you can halt it for periods of time, you can dike it, but it's going to spread. We've seen this with every technology that's been produced and throughout humanity. And so let's not have a false sense of complacency about the power of export controls. They are a tool that buy us time and space to try to accelerate urbanization and to try to limit China from acquiring technology from us that they can use to do harm to the United States. I think that many Americans would come around to being comfortable with that. But that's defensive. What I think is going to be decisive of what we do that is affirmative. Whether it's on education, whether it's on infrastructure, whether it's on attracting talent to want to come and be in the United States and capital as well. That's where sort of the gaps and the deltas are going to emerge, not over export controls.
Yeah, because you have to play both defense and offense, right? I mean, this is not, it's not just running a race, right? You actually have to play both. You have to score your own goals, and you have to prevent the other side from scoring their goals, right? That's how you do this over the long term.
Lingling, anything you want to add on this one?
100% agreed.
I was just wondering, the risk is obviously if we restrict it too much, and so where that line gets drawn, if we restrict it too much, our companies are less profitable, they have less money for R&D, they can't advance as much as they would have otherwise. That's where the discussions that we.
One offensive way to think about this is, obviously I agree with Ryan that export controls are primarily a defensive tool, but one offensive way to think about it is about shifting supply chains, right?
Yeah.
So we all own smartphones, right? Inside there are about 160 semiconductors, only 2 or 3 of them are the most advanced, right? If you restrict where those semiconductors can go, you actually what you create is restrictions on where they can be manufactured, right? So if your interest is to ensure that actually you don't have an advanced electronics manufacturing industry in one place, you restrict the things that have to go into them. That means they have to be built somewhere else. So you can use those things to shape supply chains and shape behaviors over time. It is not a magical weapon that has to be used sparingly, but it is not like these things are you're unable to achieve outcomes and to change behaviors of businesses.
Interesting. We have a question from Tai Fan at Colgate University. Tai writes, the United States and China signed an amended science and technology agreement in December. What's in the new agreement? Do you think the current administration will be on board with the agreement? What collaborations or challenges can we expect under the amended agreement?
The agreement, by definition, as I understand it, promote science and technology cooperation between those 2 big competitors. So I think there are significant challenges for this agreement to be actually implemented under the current administration for all the reasons Ryan and Matt just talked about, the national security concerns, forces technology transfer, China's protection of IP. So I think the agreement actually being implemented, the chances are quite low, unless you disagree. And I would just add like one more thing to the great conversation Ryan and Matt just had with you on export controls. So export controls are one tool in the U.S. toolbox. It is a very potent tool. That the U.S. using it is like hitting the China where it hurts. If Xi Jinping had a wish list, there are two things he wants the most, right? Number one, probably Taiwan. Number two is for the U.S. to lift export controls because
it's probably a quarter of the time dealing with Biden was on lifting export.
Exactly. So it just shows, because Xi Jinping's ambition to make China even a greater industrial and technological superpower, they need continued access to this. So the FTA, the Science Technology Agreement, definitely would work in China's advantage if that agreement gets implemented and strengthen the kind of cooperation that is very much in doubt right now.
End use controls, not much use in this sector.
Well, I think we've seen that the Bureau of Industry and Security and the Department of Commerce has very little recourse to be able to enforce end use controls and end users. They have one or two enforcement agents that cover all of China. They have to submit requests well in advance to be able to go to a particular facility to follow up on something, right? And so the ability to be able to sort of follow up once the item has been turned over and you've lost custody of it, it's in the Chinese jurisdiction, really difficult to figure out how you actually enforce the follow through of where it's at.
Is that something that the Trump administration should ask the Chinese? Okay, you want this stuff? Then give us unlimited access to the users, and that we don't have to tell you in advance that we're showing up. We just show up.
The direction is to move in a jurisdictional direction of restricting just the Chinese jurisdiction, right? This is what the Biden administration moved on in terms of the October 7, 2022 export restrictions on semiconductors, as we move from a by firm, by entity restrictions to a jurisdictional,
right?
Like nothing can go to China,
right?
That's the direction we're moving. We're not moving toward, because largely we don't trust.
In order to I mean, that's the issue, is if you had enough agents, so literally be hundreds and hundreds of agents that you would have, the Chinese would have to accept them. They'd have to be allowed to go and do that. But the president cares about the bilateral trade deficit. These things ain't cheap. This would reduce the bilateral trade deficit billions and billions.
That was certainly Xi Jinping's position during the first Trump administration, is we'd love to solve the trade deficit with buying all the things to restrict. President Trump did not bite that.
No, but the issue would be then we're not going to do that. But if you allow us access to this, to some degree, like when we've discussed, the listing of Chinese companies, my answer was just allow for the audit. Allow for the audit, and ultimately it took 12 years, but ultimately they did allow for the audit. So it takes time, but ultimately you can sometimes get there with more transparency. Let's go to the global order, which we've talked about. How the cuts to USAID, other government, the State Department now, WHO, the Paris withdrawal from the Paris Agreement, WHO, some UN agencies. How will that affect our ability to compete with China? Now we polled this issue. Can we have a look at what the audience thinks? Are you concerned that China's global is very concerned? So again, it's very split. A third of the people are very concerned, 38%. So obviously 71% are concerned significantly, 22% and 7% are not concerned at all, 7% don't know. What do you think, Ryan?
Well, my view on this, Steve, is that if the United States does not lead in addressing some of these challenges, a vacuum emerges. And there is no country in the world capable of filling that vacuum. China does not have the capacity to do so now. And if these challenges are not being addressed, whether it's pandemics or the rise of global temperatures, non-proliferation, the potential for out of control artificial intelligence, and we can build out this list even further. They're only going to metastasize. The more that these problems metastasize, the greater the risk there is to the health, the security, and the prosperity of the American people. So I think about these cuts in this context much more than I do about it in a zero-sum U.S. China competition context, because I just don't see how China could fill a vacuum that the United States is free.
I see. I skipped one of our questions from the World Trade Center in Buffalo, Niagara, which I assume is Niagara Falls. Owen Penhollow.
Hello, I'm Owen, a student at the University of Buffalo. I'm an economics and philosophy, political science and economics major. And my question is, the United States has long viewed its elite colleges and universities as a comparative advantage. This has led to a large transfer of young talent to the U.S. Given current policies that undercut those institutions, is there an opportunity for China, with a current international student percentage under 1%, to become a global destination for higher education? And if so, is that something China desires?
Who wants to take the Matt? Did you want to?
I'll take it. So my simple answer is no, I don't think that they are prepared to take on a large proportion of international students.
Except from Africa.
Which, but to change the 1% of kind of where they're at in terms of sort of the idea that the United States, it would shed from the United States and would go to China. I think it's far more likely that, what we're going to see is, increased enrollments in Australia and Western Europe, and Canada. But you're going to still see, I think, a very real number, very significant number continuing in the United States. I mean, my experience in the first Trump administration is that President Trump felt very strongly that education is an export. He saw it as an export for the United States. It was actually quite against the idea of restricting students on that side, even though he had some security concerns. The idea that the United States would continue to bring in nearly 1 million college students into the United States to be able to practice education and export, a very important thing for the United States to continue to do. So I don't actually expect that to change.
So for Korean, Japanese, global South students, China is becoming a real center for education. When you go to these universities, you actually see very significant numbers of folks from other places.
Well, we have seen a lot of students from Africa in Chinese students, and it's because the Chinese government really showered them with scholarships and all that perks. They have been able to attract students from developing countries, but the fundamental is this ideology problem.
Yeah.
Do you want to go to Chinese universities and study Xi Jinping thought? It's really one of those cases you make that decision.
Yeah.
Henry O'Connor from the Carter Center asks, in its first 100 days, the Trump administration has been treating allies less as partners and more as targets for pressure and transactional demands. Is a U.S.-led alliance still viable, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I think it sounds like a question that's trying to answer itself there, but my take on this is that the administration has made it clear that the United States is not going to be able to provide the kinds of broad global goods that it had in the past, right? The idea of, market of last resort. The United States essentially unilaterally lowers its trade barriers to allow developing countries to be able to sell into the United States so that they can build themselves up. The United States is going to put more restrictions on that. That's a global good that it's going to restrict. And then I think the other one is sort of collective security. The United States will be the securator of last resort, right? It will provide that global security. And I suspect that what we're seeing in the negotiations between the United States and its allies is the continuation of a long-term process that the United States has had to ask its key allies, who are quite wealthy and quite capable, to do much more in the realm of providing global security goods. This comes to the Europeans. We saw this in the signal chat controversies. We could see this discussion going on, right? An expectation that that trade routes that are through the Red Sea primarily benefit Europe, Why are the Europeans not able to do more of this? An expectation on Japan to move from 1% of GDP on defense to something much higher. The expectation on a number of allies to do much more. Under those scenarios where other allies that are very capable, that are wealthy, that have more than enough ability to be able to do that and provide more global goods for that, you could see you could see an alliance system that is more evenly shared across others. And I think that's what we're seeing push for. This is not a new topic. I mean, Secretary Gates brought it up in the Bush administration and in the early Obama administration. We've been asking for this for years and years.
And what does it mean for Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan? First, with respect to Japan and South Korea, troop deployments. Are we going to reduce those troop deployments? And then Taiwan, what does it mean they're going to have to pay for their defense?
Well, I mean, it probably means that Americans can't care more about Taiwan's defense than Taiwanese do, right? So Taiwan is sitting at about 2.3% of GDP on defense. Given the threats that it faces on a day-to-day basis, one would expect that someone would pay a little bit more than that for their own defense. The United States is sitting at about 2.9% of GDP on defense. Japan is at about 1.5% of GDP on defense. Australia is at 2.3% of GDP on defense. Maybe those things were an appropriate level of spending in a fairly benign international environment. We don't live in a benign international environment anymore. Right, our 2% GDP defense spending for NATO was agreed on in 2012, right? Before the annexation of Crimea, before all of those sorts of things. We still don't have NATO allies that fulfill those requirements, right? So until those things are fixed, it's hard to expect American taxpayers to care a lot more about their security.
What does it mean for troop deployments in South Korea?
I think those, obviously those things were under discussion during the first Trump administration. My sense is that they came to a set of agreements. I don't know if things will be opened up again. But the expectation is that allies will do much more about their own defense.
Fascinating. The question we'll move on to kind of some other issues. We have a question from Horace Wong, a research analyst at Fontainebleau Capital. He asks if there's potential for climate change cooperation between China and U.S. states and cities. Brian?
Well, I think that there is the possibility of climate cooperation at the sister city and sister state province level. I think California is really sort of a path breaker in this regard. They have relationships both with the Chinese central government, but also with several provinces in Shanghai. And there are things for both sides to learn, best practices to share, whether it's about reducing air pollution, dealing with climate adaptation. And I expect that those things will continue because it serves both sides' interests to do so. However, the question didn't ask this, but I would be a little bit more pessimistic about the possibility of climate returning to the center of the U.S. China government-to-government relationship at the central level, solely because I think that there's a widespread view that in Washington, at least, that China tried to instrumentalize climate issues to influence American behavior on other issues, and that the United States should not transfer that much leverage to China on this issue. And so, yes, at the state and city level, I expect the climate cooperation to continue. At the federal level, I expect it to be pretty chilly.
What other areas are there for cooperation? I mean, climate change used to be the bright, shining example of potential cooperation. Are there other areas, or is basically it's going to be tough going? Well, no areas where we can cooperate. There's no, I mean, I think of Ebola and Chinese and American scientists working together then, but I don't see, obviously that did not happen during COVID.
I could come up with a lot of areas where I think it would serve mutual self-interest for us to pool capabilities, share best practices, and work together. But if I was going to be honest with the moment that we're in, I think that a good place for us to focus our attention is on reducing mutual risks. What we saw, for example, in the Biden administration was President Biden and President Xi agreeing that on the issue of artificial intelligence, that it should not be used to decide nuclear launches, that only humans should have the capacity to put their finger on the trigger. When we look back further, there has been progress in rules of behavior for when U.S. and Chinese forces are operating in close proximity to each other that have lowered the risk of unintended conflict between our two countries. So as we look to cyber, as we look to space, as we look to new and emerging technologies, I think this is the space where there would be mutual self-interest in finding ways to lower the probability of unforeseen conflict.
Unfortunately, in many of those cases, those things have been held hostage to other things, as we've seen in military to military discussions, over the years, have been, those talks have been held hostage to other issues. And that's really an unfortunate development that's how, in my opinion, Beijing views those things as that the United States wants those talks and communications more, and therefore it uses them as leverage to achieve other goals.
It is surprising that fentanyl, which should be able, I think, as Lingling pointed out earlier, that should be one where the Chinese are willing to cooperate in exchange for nothing.
You would think,
it's like there's a moral imperative.
Yeah. One would suggest that because they have not acted on it, there are some acts of omission and commission happening.
Yeah, of course, the Chinese will say they have acted on it, that on January 27th, they gave the U.S. government a proposal and additional things they were going to do on fentanyl. And we haven't.
Don't believe it. Don't believe it.
Well, they did have I haven't seen the proposal. They did give the proposal. Both sides confirmed that there was a proposal given, but the U.S. side said it was inadequate.
Steve, I think that your point is really important, and I'm glad that you brought it up because we've spent most of the hour talking about the U.S. side of the U.S. China relationship, but the reality is that this is a two-player game. It's an interactive dynamic, and of course the focus of this town hall is on the first 100 days of the Trump administration, but you raised a very important point.
Yeah, we kind of talked about this briefly, but we've seen several meetings between the U.S. and Chinese officials, but talk about how robust bilateral communications are and how we can, potentially improve them because we're not seeing the meetings. The Chinese say again, and I don't know, but they said they tried to have a meeting between Rubio and Wang Yi in Munich. He came to New York, and that is. Wang Yi came to New York and asked for a meeting, and neither of those were granted. So, where are we going, and where should we go? And then we'll need to close.
Oh, sure. Well, the short answer is that communication between the two sides is not at all robust. We're seeing very little. We know, like there have been frequent meetings between national security council with the Chinese embassy, and that's pretty much it. The Chinese delegation to the IMF for World Bank meetings just left this afternoon. The amount of time is stayed in Washington exact 24 hours.
24 hours. 24
hours. They arrived sometime yesterday and left this afternoon. Not 1 minute more, not even 1 minute less. And our reporting shows that there's some chatter on the sidelines of the IMF meetings, but nothing bilateral. It was very, in the context of multilateral meetings. So right now we're kind of stuck, right? As you pointed out earlier, the Chinese try to reach out to the Trump administration, but there is such a mismatch. Trump people wanted to talk to the key players in Beijing, including Cai Qi, whose portfolio includes cybersecurity, which is the core concern for the U.S. But, the Chinese answer said that's not how we work because we want to go through the diplomatic channel. And then the diplomatic channel, you pointed out, when Foreign Minister Wang Yi was here, he couldn't get any meeting with Secretary of State Rubio or National Security Advisor was. And part of the reason was because he told Rubio to behave himself, basically, during their first introductory call. That kind of, wasn't a great start, right, for an administration who thought they had so much leverage. We're not going to take this, right? So, and now, because of the maximum pressure from the Trump administration, Xi Jinping, it would be really, look really bad for him if he were to actively reaching out to the Trump administration. So, we're kind of being in a standstill right now. It has to take both sides to break the logjam. For China's side, we talked about fentanyl.
Yeah. Matt, anything you wanted to add on this? We're out of time. So.
Yeah, just that it doesn't look like the time is ripe for those kinds of interactions. I would contend that there is communication, right? Like each side are sending messages and the other side is receiving them, right? It may not be they're sitting down in a room together, but they're certainly sending messages to each other, and they're certainly being received. And so I think we should think about it broadly of that setup. Obviously Beijing would love to have start at the lower level and slowly work your way up and resolve issues, and then the leaders go to it. That's certainly not the style that the president wants, and it's not clear that just because the Chinese side wants it, that's the appropriate way. The American way could be just as appropriate, right? There is really no reason to dismiss the way the United States has approached this as the wrong approach.
Brian, final word.
As a former diplomat, Steve, it pains me to see the lack of creativity and imagination that is on display. This is a solvable problem, and I hope that sometime soon both sides figure out a way to communicate more directly with each other.
Well, they may not be communicating, but this group certainly has been communicating. This has been just fabulous. We could continue this for hours, but unfortunately, we don't have the luxury tonight. I just want to thank the three of you for doing a spectacular job, and sharing your insights. I've learned a lot from this. This has been great. The bilateral relationship is simply too important for the United States and China to get wrong. And your expertise elevates our national discourse on the topic, and I thank you. Before we go, I'd be remiss to also not thank several others who made tonight's Chinatown Hall possible. Our partners across the United States, Canada, and China for hosting. Our local experts, we have local experts placed at all of the venues who speak to the audience at our partner venues, and the Star Foundation for its continued generosity and funding. And finally, our National Committee staff who work hard to organize this nationwide event. Thank you three, and thank you all for joining us. Good night.
So you can see my camera right here.
Pam,
Oh, yeah.
they see it, or just.
Yeah.
I can figure out.
Actually, I think if everyone can scoot one seat over, then we'll sit down, because you're a little bit cut off, slightly cut off.
All right. Okay.
Moving down the mirror.
No,
One down.
yeah.
Oh, you're moving out.
Another event. Yeah, I'm Nancy. I remember your face. Remember your name again? Steven. Another thing event.
Yes.
How are things going? Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, no complaints. Very slow, but I work with high level relocation. Yeah. So thank you. You know, ready to go?
All right.
Yeah.
Well, welcome everyone. Sit wherever you want. That was certainly an interesting conversation. Let me begin on giving introductions and then a bit of the format. Thank you first and foremost for coming today. This is it's always a timely moment to be talking about U.S. China relations, but it seems like now more timely than ever. My name is Aaron Rose. The hat I'm wearing today is I'm the board chair of the Silicon Valley Forum, which is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. The format today, we do have distinguished speakers sitting around the table here. I will pose a few questions to them, and then we're going to open it up to the conversation at large. Would like to get your thoughts, your questions, and we'll go until about 5:45 or so. Feel free to get up. We got drinks and food. Make this a a friendly environment. A little bit about my background. I've been in business as an investor, an entrepreneur, advisor for over 30 years. First got involved in China in the late 1990s, and did my first deal in China in 2003, creating the first municipal bond in modern China history. Hard to believe China then was still a recipient of World Bank funding. And this was a pilot project up in Northeast China in Jilin. But I've had a number of startups that operated in China and been advising. I'm going to ask my three speakers here, as you introduce yourself and they'll give us some context on the hat you're wearing and the prism that you see. In doing that, what is one point that resonated with you? Either you disagree with or you agree with, but something that you thought, that was really important for us to understand. So I'm going to start with Darlene Chu Bryant, and give us an introduction, Darlene, and then let us know what was it, the one thing that you really thought was important.
Well, first of all, thank you for co-hosting and organizing today's event, and together, everyone here today, and to SFAR for hosting us today. Really appreciate it. But most importantly, for all the people I see around the room here today, of course, from our Lieutenant Governor's Office of the City of San Francisco, Japan Society, Philippine Consulate, and the Japan Consulate. So I just wanted to say thank you all for actually finding this topic interesting enough where you are here today. For me, I'm Darlene Chu Bryant. I am the founder, executive director of Global SF. I am here because I was previously Mayor Ed Lee's, our late mayor's appointee to run China SF. And all we did was cross-border trade and investment. And I'm still doing it today and working closely still with Mark Chandler. What I found today from what I heard is I agree and disagree. First and foremost, I still think that decoupling is very dangerous. I think that the partnership that we once had, even though it was, many people probably think that we're giving more to China than we are taking from China. I think that the U.S. has benefited significantly from our ties and being coupled with China over, hundreds of years already. But let's see how things are going. I think, especially with the tariffs, I understand that there was a huge meeting with the president about, hey, if you're going to continue with the tariffs, your shops are going to be empty in 3 months. And what are you going to do about it? And maybe that, and I believe that has, created pause. But I'd be looking forward to our conversation today to see what everybody else has to say and go from there.
Thank you, Darlene. I also want to recognize we've got a number of people on Zoom, and I think there is the opportunity to type a question in Zoom, and Tam will be able to relay those questions. Sean, please, introduction and your organization, Bay Area Economic Council, and what is it that really resonated with you?
Sure. So I'm Sean Randolph. I'm the Senior Director at the Bay Area Council of Economic Institute. The council is a business organization in the Bay Area region, about 350 corporations, all industries, business advocacy organization. I basically run the research and strategy arm of the think tank. And we have a big focus on global economics and global business, including China. We've had offices in China actually for almost 15 years, in Shanghai and Beijing, and at one time in Nanjing as well, and Hangzhou. So we've been on the ground for quite a long time. It's unusual for a regional business. needless to say, the environment has changed a lot since we first moved to China. So we're kind of rethinking how we organize ourselves, orient ourselves. Maybe more on that, but what a couple of things struck me in the conversation here that were interesting. One is on the trade side. If you look at the scale of the tariffs, which we don't know, is it 145%? Is it 60? Who knows? But they're at a level where you kind of can just effectively stop trade. You're just not going to put things on ships. And they're so big that it's just not practical to think that the importers and exporters is going to absorb that cost. So I think we're facing a huge cliff if the level of tariffs come down, but they still stay at that incredibly elevated level. I think we're already seeing almost a 45% drop in ships coming here from China, and maybe a 10% already drop in total cargo volume in California, where it's and in Oakland. So I think that's really consequential because the underlying business relationships are what have kept a lot of the U.S. China relationship going. I was listening especially to the question about the science and technology agreement, which I've been wondering about.
Yeah.
It seemed like a small miracle we actually signed it or renewed it. But there didn't seem to be a lot of optimism for what we could do with it. But that flows back into the relationship with higher education universities. And so I think that's an important topic for us here in the Bay Area, because that's been another anchor of our relationship with China. And the other thing I was listening for, something we can maybe use, is there was sort of pessimism when the topic of climate was raised about what could be done at a national level now around China, but maybe more optimism about what could be done at a subnational level with Chinese counterparts, cities, states, provinces, which kind of falls right into the California framework. So that kind of came out of this for me as one of a very narrow range of opportunities for cooperation.
Great, thank you, Sean. Helen Fu Thomas, thank you. Please give us an introduction about you and your business. And again, what was kind of a key moment in the previous conversation?
Thank you for having me, Aaron. And thank you for organizing this. And I didn't realize this is more like a national town hall. It's definitely the significant event at the right time. So I'll keep it short, but it's a little complex where I'm from. I think out of this panel, I'm the only one who was born in Beijing, China. That's accurate, right? So I think what we've seen, particularly in my 30 years career, I built businesses in China for U.S. enterprises. I represented S&W Fine Food, Del Monte, they're in the Bay Area. I was the founding CEO for Leapfrog, education tech company. I took it to China. We invested in China. We built our Chinese headquarters in Beijing. And then when, China opened when they saw their growth and when their companies became, ambitious, I built Blue Focus Communication Group in America. So I worked for a giant public company in Beijing and they built $200 million platform in America within 2 years. So I've done both. Most recently, I was hired by a artificial intelligence company back in 2019. We raised $300 million. The founders are two professors who graduated from Harvard. One's from China, one's from America. Mark Nisberg at UC Berkeley. Some of you may have seen. I brought him to the APAC event that Darlene initiated. His co-founder, Professor Zhu Songchun, is from China, and they co-founded Dark Matter Artificial Intelligence. I became the CEO of the company. And then during the first Trump administration, Professor Zhu was lured back to China. And he is now the head of the National Academy of Artificial Intelligence in Beijing. So I had to make the decision to let go Dark Matter, Artificial, the MAI, and I chose to stay here because I'm American citizen, and both my children are American citizens. I'm now founder and CEO of Moscow Go, which is very much focused on higher education. So I will focus on that. I think what really, I think it actually struck a chord with all of you when Lingling said that nobody would go to China to get higher education, to get ideology of Xi Jinping versus come to the United States. So I want to stay on that. I think in the past 40, some years, I think there was this ideal situation by educating the Chinese, by building relationships, by going over there, helping them when China is a developing country or was a developing country, they will grow up and be more like us, more like America. That didn't happen. But that didn't happen. Is that because of the president of China today, or is that because of the people in China today? I think we really have to separate the government, the policy, and the posture as a person, and the government and the party versus, 1.3 billion Chinese people. The solution is not going to be a short-term plan. It's going to take time. And then the other perspective is that China has thousands of years in terms of history. China had different emperors, China had different dynasties. We're still a young country. We're 250. So what I'm trying to say is try to be patient, because this will play out as a long game. If we as people kind of always voice our, discontent, while in China only one person's voice matters, then we're putting ourselves at a disadvantage, because as what they said on the panel, China is watching what we're talking about, how the stock market is reacting, how we're, suing each other in this country. We have an infight on the world stage, while on the other side, they are patiently watching and strategizing. So it's so important to think strategically and to act cohesively.
Excellent point. I was reminded, your comments remind me when Gary Locke was the U.S. ambassador in Beijing, and he spoke to a business delegation I was part of. He says, Americans need to understand, many Americans think of China as this new country, and it's politically, it's a new country that's wrapped around one of the world's oldest civilizations. And he said that was something that, Americans really need to understand. Sean, I'm going to ask you the question. I know your organization just did your day in Sacramento and with state representatives and the state assembly. What are your members talking about with tariffs, about the U.S. China relationship, and how it's affecting their businesses here in Northern California and specifically in the Bay Area?
Well, I think they're very focused on the tariff. If you are, let's say you're in the construction industry, we need to build more housing. The cost of construction is going up with the steel and aluminum tariff. That's not just China, but from all around the world. If you're in the port of Oakland, you're looking at lower cargo volumes. The port directly and indirectly affects about maybe 100,000 people working in the Bay Area, maybe $170 billion in total value related to port activity. So you drop the cargo volume 10%. There's big impacts, logistics, trucking, infrastructure, distribution, all of that. So I think you're seeing at the logistical level, of course, anybody who's importing anything in the way of consumer goods, a lot of that is from China. So there's anticipation of tariffs, but I think it's stalling a lot of decisions about investment and hiring in a wide range of companies because, you know, businesses like certainty. And if you don't know what the rules of the game are over an extended period, things tend to freeze up. So I think you're seeing a lot of them being very conservative about expansion, hiring, commitments, what they pay for, because they don't know what they'll be. Also, I think there is maybe a recognition, maybe more so in the Bay Area than a lot of the country, that this is a really deep relationship, and we as a region, not to mention California, that invest a lot in it over the years. And I think people are loath to let that go. You know, I think there's no avoiding the realities of the politics around it and how difficult they've become. Like I mentioned earlier, the council has an office and staff in China for 15 years. In those days, it was like the Wild West. Let's go in, let's help companies get on the market, get established on the ground. People were rushing in. Now, I've got to say, not that nobody wants to go, but you know, you're walking into kind of a lion's den, and the interest in going to China is a lot less. They're thinking about other countries now to go to. So that raises for us, so how do we focus our efforts? Because we've said we want to keep the business conversations going, when the bilateral or the subnational conversations going. And that sort of focused us on climate issues. There's a lot of support we're getting now from foundations that are helping us to do that. So I think on the business side, there's just a lot of, they're looking for the windows where they can still work together. But a lot of concern and frustration about what will be inevitably higher prices. If you're manufacturing, if your components or inputs come from China, your costs are going to go up. And just looking at that spreading throughout the economy. But it's not clear to people what they can do about it at this point, other than keep the doors open as long as they can.
Great. Darlene, you did a trip a few months ago to China with the previous mayor.
Last year.
And but you know, it's a whole different world since then. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but my impression was that you know, the panda diplomacy was kind of, you know, even at that time, one of the only accomplishments, realistic accomplishments to be made, just because of the strain of the relations between the two countries. We're now looking at a whole different new dynamic. I'd like you to get a sense of what does that dynamic look like today, particularly in relations between San Francisco, this region, as you see it, and some of the initiatives you're involved in.
Yeah, sure. I mean, first of all, you know, pre-pandemic and pre-administration, this, you know, even the last administration, China itself, we had 3 offices in China, Shanghai, Beijing, and then Shenzhen. And clearly we have closed them down, right? For obvious reasons. I think that, you know, over the years, when we saw a lot of foreign direct investment coming in from China, and even during my last visit, visit to China, even meeting with the Ministry of Agriculture from Guangdong province, for that matter, where, you know, we were trying to find and increase the number of partnerships between their companies and our companies here, import and export. And then 1 year later, we have a meeting in San Francisco, and they're saying, we had a lot of conversations, we had a lot of hope, and now we have the tariffs. What are we going to do now this year? And I said, well, bring your factories to the US. I think if you want to enter the US market and be partners with US companies, that's probably one of the only things you can do. Not the only thing, but probably top of mind, one of the easiest things to do now. But I think the second question would be, well, if I do invest in USA, how am I going to get my money into the US? But that's a separate issue. So what I see is that even though Xi Jinping has been saying, hey, we have a market that's big enough, we can focus on the domestic market in China, and you don't have to look outbound. I will say that over the last 10, 15 years, a lot of Chinese companies have already built their business and their livelihood based on the US market, exporting to the US market. And that's a market they don't want to give up. And so what are we looking at? We're looking at, for example, a company that has been making disposable paint rollers for Lowe's, and Lowe's has been one of their biggest customers. They don't want to give it up. So they're saying, Darlene, we'll work with you. We want to open a factory in the US of A. Other companies are saying, hey, we want to enter the US market. And how do we do that? For example, the US Embassy has been looking at what sectors can we actually focus on, right? That is not sensitive, that will not, trigger CFIUS questioning or hearing or what have you. And we've been looking at food. Food is something that across the board is welcome. And so can we either, look at food tech, ag tech, or just look at just bringing the factories over and investing in those companies, whether it be food and beverage or whether it be factories here in the US, right? So those are the things that we're looking at now.
Could I add to that?
Please.
So I happened to be invited to go to Shenzhen last year. It was around November. It was after your trip. And this is one of the biggest contract manufacturers for Apple, Sono, your, electronics that manufactured. And this woman, her name is Grace Wang, and you can look her up. She's very well known. Her company is called Luxshare. Luxshare is a Chinese version of Foxconn. So literally she and her brother worked for Foxconn, which is from Taiwan. And then they build their own contract manufacturer. So she invited me over for one edition. She said, I'm tired of manufacturing for Apple. I'm tired of manufacturing for Sono because I only make 2-3%. I don't have a margin. Sono can make 30-40%. I only make 3%. And I want to create my own brand. How do I do that? And as part of the trip, they took me to Dongguan, which is where his compound. And, I went to the factory and I looked at every person sitting there and doing their things. And when the bell rang and they all, stood up and moved out, having lunch hour, and then a whole bunch of other people, the next shift, walk in and sit down and do the thing. On the day I arrived that morning, somebody jumped off the dormitory from the top and committed suicide. That's not American way of life. I mean, I was there and I just look at human robots. I mean, for me, it's not, she had to manage everything to thin here, thin margin, make everything accurate, everything is perfect, every, person is acting in the same way. It's, it's good to say industrialize our country again, but I think if you've seen that and been there and then knowing that when I was there, somebody just died, literally just, jump off and die instead of going to the next shift again. It's
Very telling.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy.
Do we have any questions on Zoom before I pose another question?
Not yet.
Not yet, okay.
One thing.
Go ahead, Sean.
That conversation, we're just thinking about areas where we might do something together, but have to be creative. So, one thing that defines the Bay Area is the global epicenter for entrepreneurs and startups. And we draw people from absolutely everywhere in the world in huge numbers. And they come here with, among other things, there's a lot of venture capital, but they can scale in the US market globally. So we used to have a lot coming from China. It's a lot harder now. It's a lot harder to get Chinese investment, but times are kind of tough for Chinese entrepreneurs. Government policy hasn't, until very lately, not been very friendly. The market hasn't been that good. Venture capital there hasn't been that good. And a lot of Chinese company founders, tech and other things, are looking to grow outside of China. So they're going to Southeast Asia. They want to, if not leave China, they want to get out of China and come someplace else. So it strikes me that that's an opportunity if we can frame it, that we ought to be inviting them, come here, come to the global capital of entrepreneurship. We'd love to have you here. And there may be limits on what they can do in some sectors. You've got to be touchy about that. But it seems to be if they want to come, if they want to leave China, then we ought to find a way to make it easy to come here and start and grow their companies here and bring their capital, and bring their expertise here. So it requires working that out, working out some rules, but that may be one opportunity that's really unique to the Bay Area.
I appreciate that. Let me ask you, Darlene, SF Global, it's global. And so kind of taking Sean's point a little bit further, what are you seeing is the challenges and opportunities that the current U.S. China relationship is having on our relationships with other members within the Asia Pacific community? ASEAN and Vietnam, Malaysia. Xi Jinping was just in, I believe, Malaysia, Vietnam, Indonesia. What effect are you seeing also on the relationship with Japan and South Korea?
Well, I mean, I would say for quite a few years already, there's been a China +1 strategy, right? If U.S. China relations are strained, two things. One, U.S. companies are looking at other Southeast Asian countries to manufacture. I remember getting a question from the Indonesian trade office saying, Darlene, why is everybody going to Vietnam and not coming to Indonesia? And I said, I bit my tongue and I said, I don't know. What are we going to say about that? Anyway, we all know, but we don't say it out loud, right? So I think that strategy has been going on, and I think that the administration caught on to that, which is why they tacked on, tariffs of 46% on Vietnam, for example. What we've seen also is that a lot of Chinese companies and manufacturers have said, okay, China +1, I'm going to move my factories to Vietnam. I'm going to move my factory to Malaysia or to other countries. So I also see that going on. Is that an opportunity? Yes, but with the tariffs, maybe not. I think that for the destination countries, it's great because then they can have the opportunity to, one, see foreign direct investment, and two, increase the number of jobs for their people. And I think that's great. But really, is that a way forward, or is everybody supposed to just look and say, okay, what can we focus on? And I've been, talking to many trade offices about that as well. What is it that you're strong in, and are you really competing, or are you really creating a space for yourself? So I don't know if it's good that the business is moving from one country to another country, and is it really a greater benefit overall, or is it just moving, right? Benefit from one country to another. I'd rather see, and of course, this is something that it's at a higher level than my pay grade. But the thing is, if every single country can own their own space and not be a competition per se and taking business from another country, but really owning their space and really specializing. And I think that would bring greater benefit, but who knows?
If I could add to that,
Please, Helen.
I think Japan has huge opportunity.
Yeah.
I'm not just because we may have people from Japan. When I was at Leapfrog, our first, most profitable, robust market is Japan. It's not China. I do think this this new chaotic world of conflict may have opportunities for partnerships and deeper understanding between America, Japan, South Korea. And it's been a trend on TikTok and Instagram, like so many young people visited Japan because of the currency and, and it's getting trendy again. It was all China. And all of a sudden, everybody wants to go to Japan.
Right.
And I look at my daughter who's at Barnard, Columbia. I'm like, I've been talking to you about Japan, for a long time, never interested. But now it's like, everybody's going to Japan. Let's go to Japan. So I do think there are opportunities. I mean,
That's true.
for sure.
I'm sorry, I should add on that because I do. There have been, and for example, in Japan, with the age increasing, and a lot of young people moving out of the country, we see that there are opportunities actually to bring jobs back to Japan through international partnerships. And this is what I've seen is that, hey, if there's a shortage in the country, what can I do to take advantage of that shortage, or in terms of talent, or in terms of economic activity, but I can take advantage of that and then, make money. And I'm seeing that, for example, farming. So maybe we'll talk about that later. But bringing expertise and bringing manpower to Japan to farm, right? That'll, one, increase your domestic product, and two, also increase exports again. So I am starting to see where countries are not just competing, but looking at other countries as an opportunity, so everybody benefits. So I have seen that for sure.
I've got two more questions and then we'll open it up. Sean, the Asia Pacific Economic Council will take place in South Korea this year. What are the expectations, early expectations, do you expect that will take place at APEC, generally within the region, as well as what between the U.S. and China?
Probably a couple of answers to that. There's a through line, I think, from the APEC meeting in Bangkok previously, the one in San Francisco, and the next one in Korea around climate. Big commitment has been made on climate, and I think that's going to be a consensus through line going forward. So maybe a lot of opportunity around that. We're going to be there as the Bay Area Council. We're committed to being at the next 5 successive APEC meetings. We hosted 17 here in San Francisco during the San Francisco event. And we had a group in Lima, Peru last year. So we'll be in Korea, but the focus is going to be on AI. There's a huge conversation about AI everywhere. It's not just here. I think a lot of people look to the Bay Area as kind of the global epicenter for AI. A lot of things happening here. So we've been doing a series of forums to kind of gather perspectives and ideas, not just on California AI policy and development, but kind of looking at California global context. How does it all fit together? So we'll be hosting an AI event in Korea, and the following year, who knows? I think on China, I think a lot depends with the U.S. Like, who goes? I mean, would President Biden go? Would President Xi go? Would they meet together? Trump. It went pretty well. A year ago, they had the Biden-Xi meeting, and they got the San Francisco spirit and all those good things that people don't talk about much now. But the fact that they met, and that our Governor Gavin Newsom he traveled to China a few months before, personally met with Xi, encouraged him to come. Xi came, he said, okay, California is the place to be. We like you, please come. And something happened. So we'll just have to see this year. Will Xi go? Will Trump go? Would they meet? I think it all would turn on whether they're going and if they get agree to get together.
Well, we're just 100 days in the current administration. We'll be over another 100 days before then, and who knows what we'll be seeing then.
That's 1,300 to go.
That is 1,300 to go.
And 2027 for APEC is China.
Is China, exactly. That's a very, very good point. And the Olympics, which will be very interesting to see, where the relations are with that, and the World Cup. I mean, China will not field a team for the World Cup, but China has been investing significantly in soccer. It'll be interesting how many tourists are going to come from China to the World Cup, whether that's Canada, U.S. or Mexico. So Sean mentioned the infamous 2 letters, AI, and so I want to get your take, Helen, on what does AI mean in the U.S. China relationship? Where are the opportunities? Where are the challenges? And then I'll just turn it over. That could be a whole 2-hour discussion, but just what comes to the top of your head when it comes to AI?
It's a real arms race. I mean, face it. And I think at the end of the day, China is sort of ahead of us in terms of applications. And it, all your faces are recognized. When I was invited to this big town, everything is by the face. If you are registered as official, they use their face to open the doors. They use their face to get access. Robotics, because they have been running factories. They have been doing lots of things. So there are things they definitely are already doing better than we do. Even we have a better chips, even we have a better models, or we have more sophisticated models. But our biggest strength is really our influence. At the end of the day, I ran a podcast called Data, AI, People. So basically, my thought is that without data, there's no AI. Everybody knows that. But without people, there is no purpose for AI.
Okay, interesting. That's interesting.
I misspoke. Vietnam in 27. Sorry.
Oh, Vietnam. Okay.
APEC is, I don't know what.
So I think the real race and the real long-term win for the United States is our influence in terms of the culture, in terms of the sports, in terms of our ideology, in terms of how we raise our next generation, and in terms of our higher education. That's why I created my passion right now is the AI concierge for high schoolers and families, because without people, there's no higher education. And higher education is our national treasure. So I'm very devoted to using AI to revive the economy of higher education. Just my 2 cents.
No, that's valuable 2 cents. Any questions on Zoom before we open it up?
Yeah.
Not yet.
Okay.
All right, I've got more questions definitely, but I do want to open up the conversation to the floor. So please introduce yourself and pose your question or give us, this is also, a town hall. So question or comment.
My name is Stephen Huang. I'm president of San Francisco Association of Realtors. So thank you for being here. I want to follow up on what Helen, you said about, the human that jumped off the roof. So you called him a human robot, but I think the future of manufacturing is robotics. And so what is the US's advantage over China and other countries if robotics is the way to go? Like, do we have enough infrastructure to support that?
I think that's our hope. Our hope is that we don't have to go back and copy China and compete against China for manufacturing. We're going to leapfrog China because the future of manufacturing or assembling is more like Japan versus China, because things are, you look at Toyota and all that, right? So I think you raise a very, very good point. And there is one thing everybody missed about NVIDIA. So Jensen Huang already created this World Foundation model for robotics, and he introduced it at CES, and he reintroduced it at their conference, and nobody talked about it. But he is already very much focused on this foundational model for world of, basically automation. And that's where the advanced chips, and that's where, Apple could train Foxconn to manufacture for Apple. Apple could train Luxshare to manufacture for Apple. Apple is the most efficient operational company in the world. It's not the Taiwanese company, it's not the Chinese company, it's Apple. So that's what we have. And so hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, can I ask a follow-up question? So, the emphasis on manufacturing, what are we manufacturing? Who are the consumers? Are we manufacturing to the demands of 10 years ago? Or have consumers changed? And what do they need in 10 years? And are we going to be manufacturing to that?
That's probably beyond my pay grade.
For anyone, really.
I think it's a great question. I think I wouldn't say manufacturing by itself. I would say is how you manage the supply chain. I think lots of things can be assembled with 3D printing and all that. And right now people are printing their houses, right? Yeah. So what I'm saying is, logically, manufacturing or assembling should be closer to the end user. Yeah. And it make it far more efficient than doing all this manufacturing, ship it on the ship, bring it here, put it in the inventory, and wait for the Black Friday. That's not necessary.
Too slow.
Yeah.
I will say that, David Kaufman here with Nixon Peabody and I, when we were at CES, And we had a conversation and, the world's largest technology show in Las Vegas in January, and, fewer and fewer Chinese representation really noted kind of the lack of innovation. It really was. I mean, you've got, innovative US companies, European companies, South Korea and Japan, but that Chinese innovation was really lacking, has been lacking, well, COVID, of course, but certainly last year is still, hasn't had that innovative edge of manufacturing designing for the future. And it kind of shows where the innovation, leader may be.
The other issue is the people connections. I think, the fact that visas are harder to come by. I think that, to the point about, the World Cup, if anyone will show up, walk around San Francisco, we used to have a huge amount of Chinese tourists coming through San Francisco every day. I don't know when that's going to come back. And I think that that's going to hurt shows like CES, other kind of things, so that interconnection between America and China is, those people-to-people connections, including education, is really something.
So David, are you suggesting that the innovation is there, it's just not coming because of logistical?
Well, I mean, I would think that, I'm not sure I agree with Aaron entirely of innovation. I mean, I was just in Frankfurt, Germany. And if you walk down the street in Frankfurt, what do you see on the street corners? Electric car companies.
Yeah.
Now they have tariffs. Like I don't know what the tariff is on the top of my head, but but they're tariffing it. But the electric car companies can compete because BYD can sell has a better car than, sorry for you, than Mercedes or BMW.
Yep.
And they can sell it cheaper in Germany, even with the tariffs.
Yeah.
And so I think that in some areas, I think that we are behind.
Right.
Other areas, we probably are farther ahead. But when you go there, I mean, I think what I hear someone with the shame was that Apple didn't build a car because the notion is that when you go to China and you want to get into an electric car, you put your phone down, your car is completely controlled by your phone. Everything is totally integrated. Whereas here, like I rented a car from Avis. And I use Apple CarPlay and I'll plug it in. I'm already like crashing out of the airport. Where am I going? So I think that's the area where I think that I agree that there's some areas that we haven't they haven't caught up, but I think especially on electric vehicles, they're way behind. They're way beyond them.
So other questions? Actually, let me take her question and then we'll kind of go around. Go ahead, please.
It's John that mentioned all the business impacts and how that affects us as Americans. So if we don't keep those doors open and say worst case scenario, the tariffs this is what the reality is, then do those businesses kind of just have to put that cost onto the people and to offset those high prices? Like what do you see as what can we do as consumers? Or I don't know, just thinking about the long term, like this is what people are afraid of is the prices.
Yeah.
And how, everything is getting more expensive. If we don't have these relations, then what do we do?
Manufacturing.
I think short term, buy now.
Yes.
Yeah.
By far, by inventory.
Priorities are out of the end.
Yeah.
Walmart, come on.
I went to buy the new car last week. They said, oh, all these people are coming in, they're running shoes now. So, okay. So just-
Hoarding going on.
Just buy it now, if you can. I think, the longer term, I think there may be some businesses that say in China, they just don't survive. They operate on really thin margins. So a lot of them may just crash and burn. Some manufacturing, maybe the best scenario would come to the US, but I think the whole scenario just points to higher costs because there's a reason why they're producing in China. There's a reason why they're producing in Vietnam and Mexico. It's because it's efficient to do that. It's a lot less expensive. You think of logistics. And generally, it's a lot more expensive. So you want to produce your Apple iPhone here, you want to pay $3,500, $4,000, okay. If that's what you want. So I think we're looking at elevated costs for imports. And if you bring it to the US, it also takes, you might find a factory somewhere that can produce right now what you need instead of China, but probably not. There's this amazing supplier dense network in southern China. Anything you need, close by. it takes a long time to replicate the supplier networks anyway, including here. One of the big issues with some semiconductor plants in Arizona, they have to replicate supplier networks, and they just don't have it yet. So it takes a long time to build. If you need to build a factory, you got to buy the land, you got to build a factory, you got to get equipment. Actually have to have a trained workforce, and we have a shortage of manufacturing workers in this country. People don't want to work in manufacturing facilities anymore. And to fix that. So this is a long-term thing. And so I think we're just looking at we don't know the level, elevated prices for a long time, and how much importers and exporters can absorb will depend on the tariff level. You know, if they're 10%, okay, they can negotiate, maybe they can absorb that or a lot of it. If it's 60% or 145%, no, they can't. That's going to come straight to you. So I think it's just going to settle out country by country, China being just one, and then on the tariff item too.
Anything to add before we take this gentleman's question?
If I could add to that, I felt like these CEOs of consumer packaged good companies or electronic companies, they were paid so much, they should sort things out. What I'm trying to say is, I see people talking on Bloomberg and, you know, thinking about manufacturing, worrying about the outcome. I feel like economy is always going to be the supply and demand. Yes, there are tariffs and all that, but knowing that as a consumer, what comes to our, you know, dining room table, or what we're going to wear, or what we're going to drive, eventually it's going to be worked out by these, you know, conglomerate, you know, people who has responsibility to sort things out. I would not lose sleep over tariffs.
Okay, interesting.
I think so.
Sir.
Question to all the panelists. Given that these tariffs affect not only China, but also a lot of long-term allies of the United States, what are the chances of China potentially realigning with some of them? But from an economical standpoint, let's keep the geopolitics out of it.
They already are. I mean, we already heard, you know, they're buying from Brazil instead of USA. Our farmers are already complaining. US AID is like, you start the first week, he said, you know, we're stopping USA, right? AID. And so the first group of people that complained, his constituents, were all the farmers. We can't sell our product anywhere else because they're all packed in US AID bags. Okay, well, call Elon, fix it. And then so he's trying to fix it, but oh no, you canceled all the contracts with all the logistics guys, so you can't even ship it, even though you can sell it now. So there's a lot of problems out there.
And I
That's
guess
my tangent.
the repercussions for the United States in the long term.
Yes.
From that perspective. And okay, Brazil is one example, but I'm from Canada originally. I heard talks about Canada all of a sudden start talking to China and India.
Yes.
Haven't done it for a long time.
Yes.
Now they are. And if they start trading, like let's say in agricultural sector,
yes,
in my mind, that's a big effect.
It's huge.
And it's probably not coming back.
Right,
either.
right.
But I would like to hear yes.
So maybe, probably at least two angles in there.
Yes.
One is U.S. really has not been active for many, many years in developing new trade agreements around the world.
Right.
It really went into strong reverse at the beginning of the first Trump term when we pulled out the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And looking at China, you know, arguably that might have been our best chance at kind of aligning the Pacific economy around the U.S., around U.S. trading values and standards, but we didn't. They went forward without us. China now would like to be a member of that. The United Kingdom is a member of that. But you know, we're kind of on the outside of this trade agreement world. Has been lowering tariffs. So we haven't been pushing our interests in there. And now we seem to be, at least at the moment, stepping outside of that entire conversation. So I think one possible track is, to the extent that we step out of all of that, the rest of the world aligns with each other who are not part of that. And that redirects trade in a lot of different directions. but not with us, and we're not setting those standards. The other thing with China, I think on the one hand, it's an opportunity for China right now to kind of step into the void. There's kind of a question how far they can actually do that, because they're according to the Europeans, like, we're reliable trading partners. Good case to make, I guess. And there's a lot of awareness in Europe of the China market. They're really tied in very deeply, especially Germany. But then there's a wariness, like, do we really want to jump into China? We're having a real problem with the US, but do we want to go from the frying pan to the fire and sort of deal with the Chinese now? And they have, their own tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles and things. And I think you may see that also in Southeast Asia too, where she was just down there saying, work with us, we're reliable. And I think there's maybe more openness to it there. There's a lot of dependence already, but the same kind of wariness, do we really want to jump into Chinese now? Or, we don't want to align with anybody. So I think there are a lot of strong imperatives that China can use to kind of step in the void, but they may not be able to take complete advantage of it because not everybody really wants to be aligned with China either.
It should be noted that Hillary Clinton also opposed EVs.
Yeah.
So we were not heading into, there was no bipartisan support for trade deals in 2016. It was a labor union. Yeah.
I personally think that for China to take the role of US as building the allies is premature. Because if you look at China and if you sit down with Xi, his biggest concern is what's inside China. His biggest concern is not what's going on around the world. He just doesn't want to bow, because if he does, he loses his respect out of all the people.
Yeah.
That's all it is. It's just a posture.
Yeah.
Good point. I add one thing to that, because you reminded me of something I forgot to say. So there's a lot of ways that the negotiations, the tariffs affect China, but I kind of suspect that Xi Jinping actually doesn't want the fight, because there's all these issues in the Chinese economy. Real estate has been just in the tank, economy is slowing, and I think there's been a movement of capital. If you look at loans, subsidized loans and things, moving from kind of the commercial real estate sector into manufacturing. And so they're doubling down now, she is, on subsidizing critical technology sectors, but also really pushing manufacturing. But the market isn't that good in China, so what do? They have to push manufacturing or exports out of China. So if they can't push them into the US, is the implication they flood the world with Chinese exports? And so that's another reason the walls are kind of going up. Like, just a minute, we may want to work with you, China, but we're really sensitive to other countries, that we might just be flooded with Chinese exports and damage our own industries.
Right, Europe is already pushing back. They're saying, we don't, just because you can't export to the US, we don't want your product.
Right.
Yeah, they don't. It's gonna hurt the market.
Lawrence, please.
I mean, certainly, just one comment, then a question. The comment, I guess, is that, I mean, if there isn't a U.S.-China deal that significantly reduces the tariffs to something that's not prohibitive, which is now, it's for many products, it'll be prohibited. So there will be empty shelves, there's no question. Then we will be in a recession by the end of the year, and so will China.
Right.
So that puts a lot of pressure on both leaders, right? So and that's what the market expects. That's why the market's going crazy, right? So that's kind of a certainty. And so I guess a lot of people in the market, I certainly would agree, that there's probably going to be a U.S.-China deal, not a full deal, but something that is going to reduce those tariffs significantly by mid-year. Because otherwise, we're all in big trouble. And my question actually has to do with trouble for Silicon Valley. So on the tech side, so you mentioned reports, Sean, and there's going to be a lot of pain there. Helen, you mentioned Apple, and there's probably a good reason why we're not manufacturing paint rolls, right? I mean, that's the last thing I'd want to see is an American make that, right? Who wants to see that? So the tech sector, how are they being impacted by this conflict? Are they hurting? Obviously, Meta and Google aren't in China anyway, so maybe it doesn't really affect them. It does obviously affect Apple. You mentioned startups and also, Aaron, I wanted to ask you to also weigh in on this. The VCs folks, and some of those have influence on Trump. I mean, obviously Meta and Google don't seem to because they're getting sued, but obviously Andreessen and others do have influence on Trump. And I'm also very interested in kind of how to pressure Trump, right, to actually get up to a deal. How are they being impacted by this, and what kind of pressure do you think they would put on the president?
The companies that are in China, obviously not Google or Meta, but say like your Apples or your Intels or
Cisco
of U.S. companies, Qualcomm, Tesla, they're probably increasingly vulnerable. They're already vulnerable to pretty intense competition. Chinese companies were pretty good, and they're tolerated by the Chinese government as long as they contribute to the Chinese government's objective. And then they're kind of dispensable. But I think probably any major U.S. company in China is probably vulnerable now to political pressure, let's say. And I think that's part of the concern. You see executives of foreign companies being arrested or monopoly investigations of foreign companies. So, that's one tactic or tool the government could use to retaliate against U.S. tariffs. And the government has already said, that, well, maybe we won't allow U.S. films to come in, or maybe we're not going to buy Boeing aircraft anymore. So if you're a technology company and you're in the China market, then you're vulnerable to all of that. But I think part of it is also they're reacting in the stock markets. Why did tech companies, they plunge with everybody else, maybe deeper sometimes. I think they're seeing the risk of like a national U.S. recession because of tariffs or maybe a bull. So most of those companies, or the larger part of their global income is coming from overseas and not from U.S. money. And so I think they're seeing, depending on how the tariff wars go, if the U.S. market goes down, if the global market goes down into recession or something like that, then that just shrinks the markets. So I think they're affected at kind of a universal level. And then in China, if they're there, they have particular vulnerabilities.
So tech is the only reason China is China today, right?
Hacking?
It's not hacking, it's technology enabled the centralized power of control over 1 billion people. Without US, without tech, without everything we used and then copied over and used on the other side of the firewall, China wouldn't be China today. So it is a vocal point, right? But there is no doubt that whatever technology that we have invented and that we try to control, I think one of the panel said it's like water. Once you've created it, it's going to go somewhere. So really, I think, as I said earlier, it's really about strategy. It's not just the tactics right now. And I know there will be pain. There's concern about recession. I'm not, kind of say, don't worry about it. Of course we'll worry about it. But how much tech is going to be affected by, the tariffs and geopolitics and all that, I think is very much affected. Because, Google could never be on the other side of the firewall. There is, Yahoo, a Chinese copy of it, right? Facebook never made it because, WeChat is a super app and they just kept us from going over there. So I think the Silicon Valley and, Benoit Kostler or Andreessen, they are very much, thinking, Peter's CEO, they're very much thinking about this. What's the answer for that? I think it's just that we need to understand the other side doesn't play the game the way we play. We play with good faith. We play with trust. We play with, credibility. The other side may not care as much.
I don't think any of those three adjectives applies to our current president.
But I would take him, like, is it like a US China thing? Is that Trump Xi thing, or is that truly US China thing? Right?
Yeah.
Whoever sits in the White House doesn't necessarily is United States of America, it's just a person in the White House. So anyway, I think tech is going to be front and center, very much the focal point. You know, more than food, more than anything else.
You think they will be or will not be?
Will be.
Will be, yeah.
100%.
Darlene?
I mean, I think it started not now, but already during the first administration where the US was saying, I don't want Chinese money coming and investing in all these, innovative technologies. And yes, we don't get the money and it doesn't grow as fast. But on the other side, if you don't let the money come in, China's going to start competing and start developing their own technologies, and they're going to be competing with you. So regardless of how you look at it, we're hurt. We're hurt. Thing will hurt. No, it's really a double-edged sword in my mind.
Before we take your question, let me answer. I've had 2 US-based startups had operations in China, tech startups. And going back 15 years ago, there's still the word of reciprocity. There's still the issue of we let Baidu, in my opinion, it's a good thing. We let Baidu, Huawei had 12 R&D facilities, I think before COVID. That's good. We got a lot of Chinese companies here with R&D. Some of them are commercialization. WeChat is here. I think that's good. TikTok. Yeah, TikTok. I'm a unapologetic capitalist. So if you don't like TikTok, then don't download it. Is my opinion. But that's my opinion. But the issue has always been when the restrictions that my companies had on data, housing data in China, the commercialization, right? To put an app on an app store, you had to not have an ICP license, Chinese app store, but the Chinese government did not issue ICP licenses to foreign companies. And so that's an ongoing battle that I think tech companies are having. We've seen prior to COVID, we saw some of the financial companies, set up operations and sell some insurance policies and ETFs and other financial instruments. But then the domestic financial market has created its own challenges. And so the question is that investors are looking for opportunities. When I look at the 5, 10, 15-year horizon, China will remain an opportunity for Chinese companies. I think U.S. market will be an opportunity for U.S. companies and other, companies. That's just irrespective of who's in the White House. This is still the opportunity. It's the global South. I think investors are concerned about the being pushed out of the global South. I remember being in China when Xi Jinping was really kind of going after Jack Ma with Alibaba and curtailing the big leaders in China. But at the same time, he was calling, the leaders of African nations, saying not only should you allow these companies in, but you should give them incentives to come into those countries. And I'm speaking about Ethiopia specifically, because I happened to be in Addis when that conversation took place. So I think when you look at the, Latin America, you look at Africa and the global South, I think that's where global investors are concerned, the U.S. global investors. So
competition with Chinese.
Competition with Chinese companies, absolutely.
I wanted to add to that.
Sure.
I'm from a West African country. A lot of people, probably most of you haven't heard of. We call Burkina Faso.
Used to be called Upper Volta.
Yeah.
Right. An international crowd.
Yeah, I'm really glad that a lot of people here never heard of it.
We know what the Congo is too.
We can even put it on the map.
Real quick, we also think New Mexico is part of Old Mexico.
We have a problem with geography in here.
Right, I wanted to add to that, because I came to the US in 2014, more than 10 years ago. I went back last year and like Chinese tech is all over the places, right? It's it used to be America, but as you said it, I think America's biggest strength right now is America's influence, right? Out of, besides that, I feel like, China has taken over, at least in Africa, is, most VCs, especially in, Silicon Valley, want to play it safe. They barely want to invest into African countries. Whereas, Chinese companies, Chinese VCs, they go crazy now, right? And they pretty much controlling everything right now. I think it's at least up in the US now. I think we have to start looking into that too, because it's definitely a market. It's roughly 1.4 billion people, and the addressable market is around 600.
Fastest growing.
That's as twice as the US.
Yeah.
market.
Wow.
Fastest growing market.
So in China is seeing that. I think it's time that we start looking at it.
Thank you.
Can I add a comment to that?
Yeah, sure.
Africa. So yesterday, Area Council hosted a California Africa Transportation and Economic Forum. Evan was there, and it's really focused on the first major event, I think, focusing on building economic ties with Africa, starting with Nigeria and Kenya. And a lot of people showed up, like 200 people. Fantastic. Which kind of points to the subnational opportunity. The national level, there's a problem. If you notice that Rubio announced, or the State Department announced a couple of days ago, that they're going to be reducing the number of embassies and diplomatic missions around the world, starting with Africa. And the rationale is we're going to concentrate on priority areas. This goes contrary to what a lot of businesses and past administrations have been saying. We need to focus more on Africa. So there are these really different currents in the US, but it would be really concerning because China is wrapping up their diplomatic presence around the world, even as we appear to be pulling ours back in places like Africa.
I can add to that, I just did some research recently looking at demographics and all the areas that we think we're focusing on. They have bad demographics. Pyramids that look more like something is going to tumble over. Whereas in Africa, that's their pyramid.
Right.
And so China is clearly looking at that.
I think we got time for 2 more questions. So please.
Okay, so I'm a licensed custom broker. I'm a president of the Custom Brokers Association here in San Francisco. So we're front and center in this trade war, the tariff war, shall we say. My question is to the economist in the room here, Sean Randolph. So what I was told was that, when we thought it was just 25%, that, all the economists said, it'll just go up a certain level and then the inflation will not be an issue after that. Now it has gone up quite a bit more, but still, is that still a sound economic thinking? And where do you think about inflation?
I don't know. Actually don't know. The projections right now are for inflation to be going up by later in the year, like summer, fall, to maybe 4.5%, something like that, who knows? So going the wrong direction, basically going up primarily due to tariffs. That I think it's really hard to know the actual impact because the tariff levels are so uncertain. So for China, is it 145? Is it 60? What is it with all these other countries subject to the so-called reciprocal tariffs? But the only thing that's really clear is that it is going to reverse the trend toward lower inflation. It's going to raise inflation levels to levels we really can't predict. But the latest estimate, for what it's worth, is up toward 4.5% by the end of the year.
Yes.
No questions from the Zoom,
No
but
questions.
I have a question.
Please. And thank you to our hosts. San Francisco Association of Realtors and the business council you have here. So
Thank you.
yes, your question, you get the last one.
Yes, thank you. So we know that there is a lawsuit that Governor Newsom and General Attorney Planta is pushing for right now. I'm curious, what is the temperature on that? How are we looking? What is the chances of getting the outcome that we want? And is there anything that we can do as consumers, as merchants, to help support that lawsuit?
So any trade lawyers in the room?
Yeah. I mean, the Trump administration had a bad day today when it came to moving their policies forward. You know, there's a number of injunctions not related to that, but just across the board. So
I think the big issue is that if you look at the Supreme Court from a philosophical perspective, you know, the same concept of, you know, the president being able to take this very narrow statute and enlarge his power. You know, Biden tried to do that with student loans, and the conservatives on the court laughed at that.
Yeah.
So I think people are, you know, under this whole idea of material question, the idea that, you know, that you can't take, even though Biden had the power, according to the statute, to do what he wanted to do. But basically the court said, wait a minute, no. You're making something that's have a huge impact. You have to go back to Congress. So I think that's, you know, when Gavin says it's a slam dunk, he feels like if they vote, if the justices vote how they voted with the Biden, it's a slam dunk. But, you know, reading the Supreme Court is a very dangerous, you know, game. But it's a, you know, it could go down. And I can tell you that, you know, talking to some people on the other side of the aisle, on the Republican side of the aisle, they're hoping it happens because they don't want to come out against Trump, but they don't like the tariffs. So this is kind of be, you know, a secret way out to say, oh, yeah. And then very easy how working.
So it's a good question. I think it's telling that I think there are 26 states or 24 states that are party to the lawsuit led by California. I think it's telling that California is leading that charge. I think it's to be seen, but it is telling. Thank you to everyone. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you to the host. To be continued.
Thank you.
Hopefully, not too long.
Not too long.
I understand it's landing.
How's your little one? Yeah.